properties of the photon. The body stays here. The soul goes here. Just exactly the same. When you die, the same energy, God energy, would not take your body. You know where your body goes, and who cares about that? Your properties are teleported. What you call your soul is teleported. Your spirit is teleported. Exactly what happened here. And I'll show you that in documentation as we look at this. So the more that you look, the better it gets. See? Now, if you go down to the last paragraph on page 80, it states that when two particles come into contact with one another, they become entangled. And in an entangled state, both particles remain part of the same system, so that whatever you do to one of them affects the other one in a predictable way. And that's really true too, as far as we're concerned. And then what I like is on page 81 of your material, Bennett and his colleagues suggested that entangled particles, so let's say we're doing this for the sake of we're saying that the entangled particles in this experiment are B and C or A and B, whatever you want to call it, but the entangled particles are God and Jesus. That helps us to, it's not really, but it helps us to, okay. It says here, entangled particles serve as transporters. Introducing a third message particle, that's us, the message particle is us, to one would have a measurable effect on the other regardless of distance. So in other words, if Jesus introduces us to God, it's going to have a measurable effect on the other. That's basically what this is saying. You can use this way, see? And the reason you can use this way is this is all about photons. And the reason you can use this way with photons is because you're photons and I'm photons. So it's exciting. It really, really is. It's a very, very exciting thing. Now, if you have your material, if you look at page 70, oh no, forget that. Forget that. I just screwed up that. All right, if you look at page 71, on page 71 of your material, it shows us gauge bosons, which are photon messenger particles. And that's what we got last week. Remember, we were starting looking at angles and Mr. Angstrom, who invented angles and angels and so forth and so on. And we found out that the photons are called messengers. And what's so interesting about that, they act on these angles and reflection and refraction of light. The photons are called messengers. And when we looked at the angles, we come up with angels. And lo and behold, when we defined angels, they're called messengers. They're messengers. So the messengers are the angles. The messengers are the angels. The messengers are these photons of light. So everything falls right into place. We have ample evidence that our photons that can teleport, we can teleport, so that our photon, we can teleport. But our teleportation depends on the angle photons, which we call God and Jesus, for lack of a better. So in other words, we can't teleport by ourselves, can we? We depend on the involvement of external or extracellular photon, which would, in this particular case, be God and Jesus. Okay, now we're going to go to Innsbruck, and we're going to go to the teleportation diagram, which I'm going to share with you, and Joan is going to share with the people on television, and it's page 82 of your material. I was going to put it on an overhead, but I wanted you to be able to take this with you. So what I want you to do is hang on to this one. Put this one in plastic somewhere and slip it somewhere, because this is an important one, because this is just the beginning of this. This is just the very beginning of something, very, very special that we're going to see here. So if you're ready, Joan, you can share this with the people who are watching on television. And what you're looking at is the quantum teleportation setup from Innsbruck, Austria. Okay? Now, you'll see they call the sending station for Photon M. Now, in this particular case, Photon M is going to be you and me. Us. The message photon, us. They call the teleportation station Alice. Alice is sending out. Now, so then who would Alice be in your particular realm of life? Your meditative experience. When you go into meditation, Alice is beaming out. Om. Okay, that's what Alice is doing. Now, the one receiving this would be the heavenly Bob up at the top. The receiving station is called Bob at the top. Okay? Now, the message photon that's coming out of Alice is coming out on a wave of 45-degree polarization, which is really neat because that's number 9, which is consciousness. Okay? It travels towards a beam splitter. Do you see the beam splitter, the lower left hand of your picture? Okay. Now, here we are, here in the center of your picture are 2 entangled photons, and they've got them labeled A and B. Can you see them? They're one, but they're opposite in polarity. Now, in the third sense here, A turns and heads down towards us. You see that? B turns upward towards the top beam splitter. So far, got that? No problem? Now, here's the interesting part. We're coming out of Alice as M, and we're heading towards the beam splitter, and A, who's coming down, arrives at the same time that we do. See? In other words, now M and A are totally entangled. And when M and A get totally entangled, M loses its identity, and all that's left is A. Can you think of one? It's no longer I who live, it is Christ who lives in me. Okay, fine, that's right. So, but now M must have complementary polarization to A. That's us to A. But now up on top, B, in order to stay the same because it was entangled with A, must change its polarization. See B all the way up at the top there? Okay, so B changes its polarization to stay opposite with A, and when this happens, the 45 degrees is registered up in B. Just like that. Teleportation is successful. M has moved to B because of A. All right? You see the 2 of them? You see how A came down from the top and M, and we both made it into the splitter? And when that happened, it caused something to happen to B. B had to change its polarization, and when it did, it became 45 degrees. In other words, the soul, the spirit of A, which had been destroyed by B, suddenly now was embraced, was embraced by B. In other words, that which happened at the bottom renewed itself on the top. So, let us look at this spiritually, which I think is more fun, easier for us to understand, and totally justifiable on the basis of this Greek myth in the Bible. We all agree that the Bible says that all 3, us, God, and Jesus, are measured as photon. It says we're light. God is light, Jesus is light, we're light. So the photon is fine. Let us call Alice, you see Alice here? Let us call Alice our mind. We sit in meditation, we turn the lights out, we go, Om. And as we do, this wave starts to move out. We'll call it at 45 degrees. This wave starts to move out from us in meditation. And what are we sitting here in meditation for? We're seeking the Christ, aren't we? We're seeking God. Now, of course, you can meditate for different things, but what we do here is we're seeking our communion with Christ. We're seeking God. The place of our pineal gland is where this happens. It's the light receptor. So in meditation, we send out this message photon. You see it at the bottom? So that's our meditation. We're moving along in a wave of Om towards the beam splitter, aren't we? Okay, we're moving along in the wave of Om towards the beam splitter. I had a lot of fun last night. Joan and I were at one of our company picnics. Not a picnic, company holiday dinners. And all the big shots were lined up there, all the VPs. And Joan got a kick out of it because as we walked in, one guy went over and he looked at me coming in and he says, "Oh." But anyhow, I said to these guys, I said, hey, I can't stay too late because tomorrow morning I've got 2 photons who are going to be separating via a photon beam splitter. And one guy said, well, I'll be there, But, this is really exciting stuff when you can talk in this realm. Okay, so we're in meditation, and you can see our meditation wave coming out from Alice. Now look at in the center above. Who's flowing along in beautiful harmony? Why, it's Jesus and God. Look at them. They're together. Aren't they? Do you see them entangled? Jesus and God are flowing along. Angels are flowing, and little harps are playing, and Jesus is happy, and God, and they're flowing along, and everything's fine. See? So everything's beautiful, no problem. They reach a junction, and God says to Jesus, look, I got to head back up to the office. I got to go back up to heaven and get some stuff done. So he said, what are you going to do, son, kid? Jesus says, I got to go down to the earth. You know, that's screwed up. I'm going to head down to the earth. I got some work I got to get done down there. Okay, so look what happens. God makes a right turn and goes up to heaven. You see it? And look what Jesus makes a left turn and comes down to earth. Isn't this great? And as we are continuing as them with this message of meditation, look what happens. Jesus comes down. We're coming over in our meditation. Lo and behold, we run smack into Jesus. And we lose our identity. And that's what the Bible says in Galatians 2:20. I live, yet not I, but Christ lives in me. Because now A has come in. This is what we were looking for, and we found it. We hit it. Smack one-on-one. Jesus and us have hit it at the beam splitter, and it is no longer we who live. And when we lose our identity and become one with Christ, now God up in heaven, see way up at the top, has to change to be the same as us. So we now become one with God. And the polarization is picked up by Bob at 40. We've arrived. Okay? Do you understand? I mean, you say, well, I'm not stretching. What in the world is that? Oh, I'm not stretching for anything. I'm saying that I'm using this because it says that these are photons. And I'm using it because the Bible says that we are all light, including God and Jesus. And I see how this now works. And I see that one photon does go north and the other photon does go south. So I say, well, it's the God photon that goes north and the Jesus photon that comes south. And when the Jesus photon comes south, it hits us at the beam splitter. It kills us as far as our old, carnal, lustful, lower self is concerned. And then suddenly we change and we become one with God. We teleport. And I just want you to look at one thing with me. Look again at Jesus and God, and we're playing with words here. Entangled, flowing along in the center. So, do you see it? And then look at God going up to heaven, and look at Jesus coming down to the beam splitter. Do you see it? And then think of this. Think of this. Here we are. Look at us down here all by ourselves. And we're going to run into the beam splitter. And what are we going to do? We're going to hit our head, aren't we? Because what can we do? We're all by ourselves down there. Photo goes going along, looking in. Where am I? I'm trying to find God. I'm trying to find God. Where am I going? There's no way we can get out of this, is there? There's no way we can get out of that lower wave, 45 degrees, is there? But look at the two of them floating along, Jesus and God. And then Jesus comes down and God goes up. And think of this scripture when you look at this. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not have perished, but have everlasting life. He came down. He separated from the Father Photon. As the Father Photon went up, he came down. And when he came down, he became one with us. And we instantly were transported up to be one with God. And that's the exact way that it happened. And look at again. Do you see those two lights at the bottom, detector 1 and detector 2? Huh? Do you see them? That means that Jesus and us have come together at the beam splitter. But now take your finger and go all the way up to the top. Do you see that light at the beam splitter? That means that we've arrived in a oneness with God. Teleportation has happened, and God can look at you and say, I've beamed you up, Scotty. Isn't that great? Okay, Joan, you can put that down. Thank you very much. So there are three things to be considered with this experiment. What? No. Well, I don't know what it was. It looked like... all right. The three things that we have to consider is, in the light of this experiment, what happens to us when we die? That's one. Here, in this message, photon died, yet because of photon A, it reappeared in new life. I mean, there it was. to what happens to us as we meditate now while we are alive. If we take on the properties of Christ, can we not flow within the center plane and be there for someone else who's seeking? And what about near-death experiences? I'm looking at near-death experiences. That's too big. I know, but it's not dissolving fast enough. There is much in near-death experiences that are interesting. But you know what I find is the near-death experiences you can find are obviously people who are connected to their spiritual upbringing. There is something that I look for to say, what do they all have in common? I have never read of a near-death experience where a Hindu met Jesus, or a near-death experience where a Christian met Krishna. They all meet that which, you know, which means that it's not a death experience, it's a near-death experience. The carnal mind is still very, active. But there's one thing that these people have in common that is of interest to me, and in light of this, they see a very bright light. They all see a very bright light. The silver cord hasn't let go, the person still has a monk, but yet they've gotten close enough to possibly have experienced the teleporter photon. Yet look what's happened here. They've gotten out of Alice, they've gone to the beam splitter, but there's nobody there. So there's nobody to take them to any higher realm or whatever, and so they come back. They leave the body, they move a few feet. Which is interesting, because if you remember, this photon, when it was destroyed, showed up 3 feet away. And you find in a lot of these near-death experiences that these people who will exit the body for this short period of time are just move a few feet away. So you wonder what we could connect as far as this. And they have a tunnel experience, which would be consistent with the fornix and the pineal gland. And they move through at an extremely high rate of speed, which would be also consistent with the speed of light. And then they encounter beings of light, which is fine. But beyond that, the religious training starts. But the Austrian experiment seems to give some clear credence to the light encounter as being photons.
It's broken up. Take a little piece at a time.
All right.
It really works.
Now, looking once again at that experiment, we travel out from the pineal gland in meditation as the messenger of our heart seeking to speak with the Christ. Behold, the messengers from above meets with us at the pole splitter. Do you see that? And as you think of that, I want you to look at page 786 in Matthew 11. We'll get to Rich in just a minute. And in Matthew 11 on page 786, when you look at that experiment, and you see photon A coming down to the beam splitter to consume us. Think of this scripture, Matthew 11:10. For this is he of whom it is written, behold, I send my messenger before your face, which shall prepare your way before you. And God's messenger is necessary, as is proved in this experiment. Just before we get to Richard's, one last thing I wanted to talk about. Rene Descartes. If you look on page 84, well, first of all, before you go to 84, go to 79. I gave you this about Rene Descartes because he experimented in the science of optics, as you can see there. And then in the third paragraph, he talked about mathematics to philosophy, his famous statement, I think, therefore I am. But in optics, he discovered the fundamental law of reflection, the angle of incidence equal to the angle of reflection, and paved the way for the theory of light. Okay? But I didn't give you documentation of what Rene Descartes said. I mean, this is not somebody, who sat up in a room with a candle somewhere and said, maybe this would be. This was a man of great wisdom, of the Voltaire, of the Galileo, of that ilk. Okay. And so, if you go to page 84, I had some things there about Rene Descartes. in the very first paragraph it says, in Descartes' conception, the rational soul, an entity distinct from the body, makes contact with the body at the pineal gland. Okay? You can read that at your other time. Go down to the second paragraph. Descartes' most extensive account of casual mind-body interactionism of the localization of the soul's contact with the body in the pineal gland. He erroneously thought that only human beings had pineal glands, but nonetheless he was tuned into the pineal gland as being the seat of the soul. And in the third paragraph, Descartes is best known for his view that there is one place in the brain, the pineal gland, which is the end point of sensory input and the beginning point of voluntary actions. And there was a Margaret Cavendish who disagreed with him. In the fourth paragraph, the physical description of the center of bodily movement is augmented by the claim that the mind is capable of being affected by physical motion. And then Descartes said in the latter case, the whole action of the soul consists in this. And I think this is really, really interesting. That solely because it desires something. What does your soul desire? It causes the little gland to which it is closely united to move in the way requisite to produce the effect which relates to this desire. And that was from something that Rene Descartes wrote called Passions of the Soul. The last thing that I have is at the bottom of the page, the Age of Reason. At the period when philosophers emphasized the use of reason as the best method of learning truth. And if you come here, you know that's exactly what we do. Come, let us reason. The period of the Age of Reason in the 1600s and 1700s is called the Enlightenment. And you can see the leaders, including Jacques Rousseau, Voltaire, Rene Descartes, and the English philosopher John Locke. And they worked in astronomy, anatomy, chemistry, mathematics, and physics, exactly what goes on here. And they founded scientific institutes and believed that the scientific method could be applied to the study of human nature. And in the very bottom there, the philosophers of the Age of Reason believe that human beings, and I'm not going to name the church here because, I'm going to on television, it just makes people upset. Even though they did this evil, still human. The philosophers of the Age of Reason believe that human beings have a unique advantage over all other creatures because they can reason. These philosophers credited reason for all the achievements made in science and philosophy. They contrasted reason with ignorance, superstition, and uncritical acceptance of authority, all of which they felt had dominated the Middle Ages. They blamed people in authority, particularly the leaders of the church, for keeping others in ignorance to maintain their own personal power. Well, I don't know about you, but me and my house will follow Rene Descartes, Voltaire, and Galileo, and the rest of them, and leave the guys in the robes to their own madness. Okay, that's really interesting. And whatever stuff you need, but you've got, now we can go on from there because we've milked this thing to death, I'm sure, but you've got the information from, could you set the overhead real quick? You've got the information from Innsbruck, and now I want to introduce you to Rich, and Rich come up with some really interesting stuff. And what we're going to do here, Al, is we're going to put this on the overhead on the wall. Okay, so if you can turn the lights down, I think you probably have to turn them pretty well down because he's going to need to... Not yet, don't what? Huh? Yeah, come on. This is Rich Doppler, of the famous, for all of you on television who have heard of the Doppler method radar, they named it after Rich. Because he finds all this stuff. Now, if you want, you can stand up here and tell everybody.
Okay. I wanted to just show where it kind of came from real quick.
You do whatever you want, don't you? But I'll get downstairs. Now, keep talking or else we're going to have dead time in here.
All right. I'll explain what I'm going to be doing. Basically...
oh, you don't, now what?
Yeah, I know. I needed to use this for a minute. Yeah.
I don't believe you.
I did it to confuse you.
Oh, okay.
Basically, where this all came from, and I needed to explain this, otherwise you're going to say I'm just a kook like somebody else. But basically, what I'm going to look at is a thing called the harmony of Apollo. And where it came from basically is, we've talked about Greek geometry before, where the Greek alphabet is assigned numbers, and the words, the total numbers equal a specific person. And we're going to look at Apollo real quick, which in Greek is a pi, O lambda. There you go. And I could do all the numbers for you, but to save time, when you add these numerically up, it comes to 1061. Okay. Now, what the Greeks did, they just took two entangled circles intersecting, which I thought was kind of neat, and they took the measurement from here to here, labeled that A, from here to here, and that's B, and from here to here, and that's C. They took Apollo, the mathematicians did, the numerical value of Apollo, and substituted it for this measurement of A to A, which is 1061. Now, they just looked at a basic geometric mean. To get a geometric mean, when you have a relationship between any three numbers, A, B, and C we use because we're going to assign a value, they took, again, A, 1061, and the other extreme, when they did the math to get B, came out to 612, and C, the relationship here, from here to here, came out to 353. And basically, these numbers, this is Apollo, this is Hermes, his brother, and 612 is Zeus. And you can get it mathematically. Again, to find the geometric mean, which is B, B equals the square root of A times C. Again, 1061. C, the value of Hermes, 353 equals B. These multiplied out comes to 611.99, which is 612. B equals 612, which is Zeus. And I know I went through that fast, but basically I needed to show you what this symbol means. This symbol is also a metaphysical symbol behind light that's used in the Greek geometry. And now we can move on to the...
Move that over.
Yeah, okay. I can explain, if anybody has questions on this later when we have more time, I could probably do it a little more thoroughly, but...
Okay, now which one?
Yeah, we'll put the first one. And basically what we're going to do is look at the first three verses of the book of Genesis, and we're going to do a geometric proportion. Yeah, thanks.
I don't know if it's on now?
Yes. Okay, this is the first. First, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void. There was a void. Then as geometric progression starts, the first geometric symbol would be the projection in the 6 directions, up, down, forward, back, and side to side. And that's the geometric projection. The next step is to connect, makes the 4 lines of the square over that geometric projection. Then to form a pyramid, this is actually supposed to be up. This is the pyramid.
Well, I don't know how to get
That's
it
okay.
up.
Okay, so we have that projection, a pyramid up, okay, and then slide it over again, Bill. Okay, we have this is the pyramid up, then a pyramid down. Now, if you notice, all these lines are straight lines. Metaphysically, that's male. Okay? Once this octahedron is formed, the natural tendency is to start spinning. If you spin this, it becomes a sphere. That's female. Just like the Bible says, male was first, female was second. Then, if you can move that up, Bill. Once we have the sphere with God in the center of the universe, again, a lot of times people recognize this, the symbol for Ra, or the sun, Helios. A lot of meanings to these things. Now that movement was possible, the next step was to move to the outside of the sphere, to the edge of the sphere. And you'll see what I'm getting to. I know this is taking a lot of time. But technically, by moving out of here, when God said, "Let there be light," is when the change was made to the outside. Once it got to this point, we can go to the next slide. And there's a lot of math behind all this that I don't have, I mean, I can't really go into to explain all these geometric projections. But that's upside down, too. The next thing that would happen, if we can lower it just a little bit, the one sphere, the only thing that could happen next would be to create a second sphere. Okay? And that's where we get the symbol of Apollo, the harmony of Apollo. Also, if you notice in that, where the Christian icon, the fish, came from, was right in there. And that's where Christianity actually, the Christians kind of snuck away that from the Greeks, because the New Testament's written in Greek. The feeding of the 5,000 has a geometric proportion. The whole story is one big geometric proportion story, of which it started with the fish. And then Jesus was assigned that icon. Again, continuing the progression, the first day of Genesis, again, rotation starts. Just like the galaxies, everything's rotating. So you get the second day of Genesis, the third day of Genesis, the fourth day of Genesis as it continues. Then the fifth day of Genesis is up here. Okay, so you have the 5. And the sixth day of Genesis we'll put right here, which is that symbol of the flower. Now, then the seventh day was rest. Again, with this symbol, you'll notice that you see it in Pennsylvania Dutch artwork. Okay, you see it. The Egyptians used the symbol of the flower. A lot of people. That's where the symbol of the flower came. The next progression, basically, is what is known in the Egyptian and the Greek as the seed of life. We start out with another group of circles. It continues around, and it's upside down again.
Oh, we mean it, yeah.
And then this symbol is known as the seed of life.
The what of light?
Seed of life. The seed of life. Seed. The reason it's called the seed is when this expands out again and continues around, you get a bigger diagram of the same pattern called the flower of life. Okay? Which is imprinted in the Egyptian pyramids on the walls. Okay? Now, what I did too that was interesting that was in this article was, here we have we can move that up. This is the tree of life from Kabbalah. Okay? Just to show how this integrates. Move it up again. When the tree of life is over the seed of life, the points all intersect. Okay? And again, this is nothing but geometry. Nothing spooky, eerie, weird. And the whole point that I wanted to show you this so quickly was, again, the harmony of Apollo, which is the symbol for light. And the thing that I found was when I looked at the Time magazine picture that Hubble took of the eye in the sky. We'll put that on. No. Yeah, the eye of the sky. Okay? I was looking at that, and I said to myself, my gosh, it's the harmony of Apollo. So I laid the harmony of Apollo over it. A to A, B to B, C to C. And I said, whew, gave me a little chill. And I said, basically, in my mind, Time magazine called it the eye of God. The Greeks would have called it the eye of Zeus. And I look at it as a symbol for a new Genesis. Because it is a symbol of light. It's new to us in the age of Aquarius. It is light. Ties in mathematically, so it's not something I just grabbed out. And I just thought it was totally amazing. I didn't do anything but shrink the picture out of a book to the same size as the picture out of Time magazine. Didn't alter a thing. And the ramifications of the harmony of Apollo to so many other stories in the Bible is phenomenal. In particular, the feeding of the 5,000. That is it's just dynamite. But that's it. Sorry, I don't know too much.
Now you did. You know how good that makes me feel to see people who are diving into this and finding these things and seeing these things. It's very, very fulfilling and rewarding for me to be a part of it. And you know, this is real stuff. This is when, you know, you start talking about the kingdom of God, that you've graduated to the point where you now can look at the Bible, where Paul says in the Bible, the things, the invisible things of God from the beginning of time are clearly seen, being known by the things that are made. And we have no excuse, and we have no reason to run around looking for religious faith when we have the magnificent beauty of God's creation. And now with the evolution in Aquarius of the consciousness that has taken us to Hubble, we can see all of these things and plot them as he has, face to face, face to face, face to face. So thank you very much. That was a super job by Mr. Doppler. Okay, we'll see you. Bye-bye. Good. We have some new people here today. And I don't want to run off without bringing you up to date on basically what we're talking about. So for those of you who have been through this, just bear with me. And it doesn't hurt to go through this again, because it's a very significant thing. But what happened here, what was so interesting, was revealed in a newspaper article, which Joan has. If any of you don't have the article, then you ask Joan, and you have some of these articles, right? Newspaper articles from the Associated Press, you have them? Okay. Now, the reason is because I want you to be able to walk out of here with documentation. You can't document for anybody that this is true or this, but you can document this is the basis upon which we're reaching a conclusion. Okay? And that's what, you know, in every church in the world that I've never seen anybody prove anything. And I just, you know, I have no patience or time anymore to consider things that can't be proven. I don't care whether it's fundamental or it's New Age. It doesn't make any sense to me unless you can prove it. And so that's where we're coming from. And so you are provided with documentation when you come here of everything that forms the basis of what we're discussing with you. And today I have 3 new pages. Now, you should have, after you get done today, have 79 pages of documentation. If you don't have the 79 pages of documentation, if you don't have any of it, you see Joan, and if you come back, we'll provide it to you. In other words, it is scientific documentation. There's no New Age stuff. There's no religious stuff. There's no spirit. It is scientific documentation of everything we've said. You know, and that's important, because if somebody says, well, where does he come up with that? And you can say, well, it's right here. It's in Grolier's Encyclopedia, or it's in the Academy of Science, or God knows, you know. But this was the interesting thing that occurred. Now, what science did, the scientists in Austria, they took 3 photons. Now, photons are light particles. When an atom gets excited by heat, it emits an energy that you see as light. Now, there are photons that emit in the ultraviolet spectrum that you can't see, or the infrared spectrum that you can't see. This is in this particular wavelength, you can see this. Okay. Well, anyhow, what they did, what they were trying to do, and they labeled them A, B, and C. And what they were trying to do in the laboratory was get A to C. And what they found out they had to do is they had to first entangle B with C, which they did. Once they got B and C entangled, they come up with the law governing photons and their operation of the subatomic particles. Though they're one, they have their opposites. This will go that way, and this will go that way, but yet this may go all the way 1,000,000 light years this way, and this will go 1,000,000 light years this way. But if one stops or changes, the other will stop or change. Okay, so they got C and B entangled, and when they did that, they were now able to get B and A entangled. And when B came over to A, something strange happened. When B came over to A, B actually destroyed A. But C had to maintain its opposite polarization with B, so C changed its polarization. That's a law of nature. And when it did, it changed it to A, which was now opposite of B. And so A became one with C. In other words, A moved to where C was. So what basically, in so many words and a little simpler, they killed A, and instantly A showed up 3 feet away. The light was destroyed, the photon was killed, and it reappeared 3 feet away. Now, when we looked at this, we said, well, yes, I was curious about this. Basically, that's the same way, if we look at photons as light, Jesus says, I am the light of the world, photon. It says in John, God is light, photon. And Jesus says, you are the light of the world, photon. So if we're photons, and we take this as us, this is God, and this is Jesus, we can do the same exercise. Jesus and God are entangled. But yet they're opposites. Jesus is human, God super. So that squares. Now, Jesus comes into us. And when Jesus comes into us, we become one with God. And it works. So in other words, what it does, it explains the principle behind the Bible. That this is the way all subatomics, this is the way all the invisible forces in the universe work, and we saw proof of it. Okay? And so that is the basis here of what we're talking. So what we're, like what Jesus would say in the Bible is no one can come to the Father but by me. Well, that's true. No one can come to C but by B. If B doesn't come to A can't come to C. So it's true. And that process we're talking about is true. And the process is the change of polarization. And that is the change of the angle. When C changed its angle, it then was on the same plane as A, and so they could come to one another. So the change of the plane, the change of polarization occurred to C when B came to A. Okay? So the change of God opening himself to us happened when Jesus came to us. But of course, if you're Buddhist, you could use Buddha. If you're Hindu, you could use Krishna. Allah, use whatever you want. Doesn't make any difference. You can use chicken soup, oatmeal, and asparagus. It doesn't make any difference. It's B, A, B, and C. It's all going to do. It's going to work anyhow, no matter how you do it. But it is curious that that is the function, the way the Bible teaches us that all three, we're light, Jesus is light, and God is light, which means they're photons. And so then they go and start to saying, you can't get to God but by Jesus. A can't get to C but by B, so it does work out. And the experiment in Austria, which was in the newspapers all over the world through the Associated Press, documented that, and you can have a copy of that before you leave here. Now, this whole process brings us to something that started this whole thing, which we talked about a long time ago, and that was the Coptic Key. You remember the Coptics, who were kind of pseudo-scientists of ancient Egypt, so they received a key from Jesus, who said, you'll have to have this for getting to the other side. And that was this 8-circled symbol, the word azozio, and the number 4555. So we started to study that. We started to look at these things because, yeah, it's interesting. Now, when we looked at this, well, maybe this could have something to do with 8 planets because of the way the circles at the end. And lo and behold, right after we discussed this, the scientists and astronomers discovered 8 new planets, didn't they? And every one of those planets lined up scripturally with what was in the Bible. Every one of them. Started off at Virgo, ended up at Leo. And just exactly from the Virgin to the Lion. And so we followed that. And then, right after that, came the 9th planet, and the number 9 meaning consciousness. And where do you know? That was in the constellation called the Crown, or as it's labeled, it was the Crown. And then we saw, finally, after all of this, the picture from Hubble showing us this tremendous shot of the eye in the sky. As Jesus said, if your eye be single, your body will fill with light. And we looked then and we saw through Hubble the single eye of God, the third eye, which is there. And that's the picture from Hubble, was in the National Geographic. I mean, isn't it amazing if God's proof? He said, well, let's show them proof. We'll put it on the front page of National Geographic. That should get their attention. Didn't Nobody paid a bit of attention to it, did they? Nonetheless, there it is. Okay. So, when we're thinking about that, we then came to the realm of Azozio, which we had to understand that, and 4555, the number 4555. And at this time, we'll focus on Azozio for just a minute because of the Austrian experiment and the polarization change. The polarization, if you take two pieces of polarized glass, like in, sunglasses, and if you change their angle, you can prevent the light from going through. No light can get through. Then you change the angle back, and light can go through. What's interesting about this word Azozio, that was part of this symbol from Jesus to the Coptics, which was thousands of years ago, is when you break the word down. All right? And if you will open, if you brought your stuff with you, and I'm sorry for those of you, I forgot to bring the material for those of you who don't have it, but I promise you that if you come back, I'll have it for you. But if you look on page, let's see. Oh, 76. That's the one we gave last week, okay? Page 76. Now you see two things here. Azo is a light compound. So azo, the word azo, or the root word azo, means light, and zeo is the word zeolite, which means crystal filter. So here we have light filtered by crystal. And what's so interesting about that now, we learned this a long time ago, but what's so interesting about that now is in light of the Austrian experiment, this is exactly what happened. Because where you had A, B, and C, in order for C to change its angle or change its polarization, that light photon then would have to filter, would have to change in its filter structure in order that A could become one with C. So that works, which is interesting. To me, it's very, very interesting when things work like that, and that one does work. Okay? Now, let us consider the word given in the key as light filtered by crystal again. Light whose movement is allowed by the change of the crystal, the change of the polarization. And what we're seeing now in the Austrian experiment, of which you'll get a copy, is that this worked, they did it, and it's exactly how nature worked this change in the photons. Now, LCDs, have you ever seen liquid crystal? LCDs, where you have maybe a computer or a calculator or something like that. LCDs are crystal displays which rely on polarized light to make information available to you. Like a sugar solution, a liquid crystal rotates the plane of polarization until you can see the light. What they're talking about now, like I have an LCD laptop computer. And what I was saying to them, why don't they make these laptop computers, for the regular PCs, the big ones, and because they don't do to your eyes what the regular ones do, the X-rays. They don't put out the X-rays that the other ones do. So anyhow, Azozio then, given to the Coptics thousands of years ago as part of the Coptic Key, has a relevance to the experiment in Austria. And that's something that we have to set aside and put under the microscope, because that's very important, because it was the polarization that allowed A to move. I mean, you have to understand something. A was killed. A was destroyed. It was wiped out. I mean, it was killed just like a human being dies. When a human being dies, you say, well, they're dead, they're gone. But what happened? What happened was, when they killed that light, it appeared 3 feet away. But they had destroyed it. It reappeared. So it opens a whole tremendous room for us to look at this and study these things. See? So if Azozio is polarization, and C changed its polarization to become one with A because of B, then the Coptic Key is beginning to reveal this part of the process of the very movement of us to God via Jesus, or whomever you want to discuss it with. So let us take a step into the realm of the invisible now, together, as we consider all this. We have, like we talked a moment ago, we have A, B, and C pretty much entangled. Okay? And that leaves well, let's not entangle A yet. We've got B and C entangled. Or if we want to, in a religious context, we got Jesus and God entangled. And I don't think anybody would argue that that's a reasonable idea. Okay, that leaves A, us, off by itself somewhere. We're off by itself somewhere. If you're going to entangle B and C, you'd have to, draw a line, and like that, you'd have to entangle them, and the straight line can. Now to bring B to A, you have to go like this. Okay, and then A to C, another line like that. Okay, you have a triangle, don't you? Or you have a right angle. Because when I started looking at these angles, I says, wait a minute. If B and C are together, and A is somewhere else, then if you bring A and you start connecting B to A and then A to C, then you have. So I started looking. If you would put overhead 25 on, and you just put the light down a teeny bit, Al, to put it, you'll be able to see. And so what I ran into when I started looking at, that's fine. The angles, that's fine. That's good. Was this. And I said, the sine of angle A is the ratio of the lengths of B and C to A and B. But all I wanted to show you was there in these angles was the same principle that was at work in the Austrian experiment, what I'm seeing is the same thing. Now, what I want to show you is if you could put overhead 26 on. Overhead 26 shows white light entering a prism. Okay? And this is interesting because what happens is the white light enters a prism and then deflects or comes in at an angle in all various colors. The colors of the spectrum, red, orange, yellow, green, and blue, which, as we've come up to the conclusion, this is really Joseph's coat of many colors, and that's what it is. See? So in both cases, then, the Austrian experiment and overhead 26 that we're looking at now, we're seeing white light, which on an angle enters the universe and then enters us. And then what we'd have to say, okay, then this is an angle of light, isn't it? Certainly it is. And it definitely enters the Earth on an angle. No question about it. Light enters the Earth on an angle, so that's fine. Okay, thank you. You didn't put the light back on. Now, so we got to stop here. Let's stop here after we've looked at that. And let's think, because we're running directly into a misunderstood word. And that is the word angel. What is an angel? What is an angel of light? And of course, in our religious ideas, we have people with wings on them, flying around and whatever they do. Okay. Could the 3 photons in the Austrian experiment be angels of light? Ah, that would be interesting. And why are these religious things called angels in the first place? Well, I mean, all the different words or names that you could come up with, why are they called angels? And to me, that's the way you have to that's the way my head works. If I'm saying, there's an angel. So the first thing that comes into my head is, why is it called angel? Why not, root beer or something? Why is it called angel? Must be a reason. And then when you start looking, it gets very logical. And that's the most important thing that you and I can share together, that God is logical. Everything that we do, all of our lives, from the time we're born, is based on logic. Our schooling, our jobs, our raising our family, all this is logical. Then every Sunday we go to church and just immerse ourselves in everything that is bizarre, totally illogical. And that becomes the basis of our lives. And we make sure our kids go and get trained in this illogic, bizarre stuff. Okay. Now, we understand that for A to get to C, there's got to be a change in polarization. We've beaten that to death. In other words, the photons, or light particles, before we become enlightened, are all over the place. That's what's happening. These light, they're all over the place. That's like us. There's no way we can get to C. There's no way we can get to God as long as our photons are like this. No way. And I'll tell you something. You know what I'm saying? You can pray. You can go to church. You can join the choir. You can go to Bible studies. You can do all these things. You can lay hands on people. They can lay hands on you. You'll never move A to C. Never. Why? Because you have to do it scientifically. There's a scientific way that A moves to C. And the only way that A can move to C is if B comes into A. And the only way that all of this can be done is polarization. And what is polarization in you is meditation. You can only change your polarization by meditation. There's no other way. No other way. You can get in a car, and you say, I am laying hands on the car, and the car is going to take me to New York. No, it isn't. You're going to have to drive it. And that's what's going on here. If there is a change of the angle, say, now, what do we say? In order for A to get to C, there's got to be a change in polarization. The photons or light particles are all over the place. But if there's a change of the angle and all the vectors are moving on the same plane, then we have polarization. In other words, from all of these particles, suddenly we get a wave moving. And everything flows, A to C. Everything's fine. That's the only way A can get to C. No other way. Now, I'm going to give you page 77 of the stuff. All right? Page 77. You just got it today. Try to move a little quicker if you can. Okay. There you go. That's those 15 minutes in front of...
For converse.
Okay. All right, you got your stuff? Now that's page 77. Many of you need 1 to 76. I understand that, and you can get that from Joan. But anyhow, there's the 77. What you've got in your hands is how I arrived at these ideas. I'm not trying to prove anything to anybody. I'm simply saying, let's look at this. Let's be a little intelligent. Let's be a little mature, and let's think about these things. All right? Okay. For those of you, they'll get around to you soon. Now, if you look at 77, okay, you look at the vibration or vector of a light wave, okay, at random angles. If you look on the very top one, it says polarization of light. The moving points of a transverse wave, blah, 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 of the light wave. The magnetic field is considered ineffective, maybe, blah, 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 blah. If the electric vectors of a group of transfer waves are at random angles, in all directions, the light is said to be unpolarized. In other words, you're all over the place. Basically, put this into consideration with your mind. You don't know which way you're coming, you don't know whether you're coming or going. And you're trying to find God. Okay. Now let's read the next. Conversely, if the electric vectors are all along the same plane, the light is said to be polarized. Some materials can induce phase differences, blah, 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 blah. Other materials called polarizers. Now listen to this. Other materials called polarizers transmit only waves with electric vectors in one plane. The remaining waves are either reflected or absorbed in something else. So only that part of you, only that photon which is inside of you that is vibrating in harmony can get through to C. The rest of it can't. Why? Because that's the way it works. You spent your lives going to church and talking about God's kingdom. This is the kingdom of God. Instead of talking about spirit and soul, start talking about photons, because that's what exists. Spirit and soul don't. You say, well, I believe in the spirit. Well, where is it? Nobody's ever proved the existence of a spirit, but they prove photons all the time. Because photons exist. Those are the subatomic particles. And I'm not saying, when the ancient people used the word spirit and soul, they were trying to describe photon, but they didn't know what they were. They knew something was there, but they didn't know what. Okay? See, that last sentence, materials called polarized, only waves in that one plane. So when you get into meditation and you start changing your polarization via meditation, then you start moving on that one plane, and then A can get to C. Okay? So the polarization, the ability to get A to C, or U to God, depends on a change of the angle of B coming to A, or Jesus coming to you, or Krishna coming to you, or Muhammad. I don't really care who it is coming to you, but B has to come to you. This photon has to become one with your photon so that you then can be one with this photon after you die. But there's more to this. And this is the important and exciting part. When you realize this all happens after death, but what about life? What do you say if you become B? If B comes into you through your meditation, now you become B because you're destroyed. And that's what the Bible said. It is no longer I who live, it is Christ who lives in me. It is no longer A who lives, B lives here now. So now what can you do? Through your meditation, you as B can go to A, who is somebody that may be sick in your family. And when you go to B, and when you go to A, then you're going to bring A into a oneness with C where healing can occur. This is the way it works. And we'll get down the road in that. In other words, there's a logical way for all of this to occur. This is what's called laying hands on the sick. Don't let anybody put their hands on you, because they can have grease on their hands. And laying hands on the sick is talking about moving photon from one angle to the other. Now, the vibration of this vector or light wave at random angles. Did you see where it said that in the very first paragraph? Is unpolarized. But on the same angle, it becomes polarized. These particles are, now if you're there, if you could go back to page 71, if you have that material, you'll see that on page 71, looking under gauge boson, you find that these photons act as messenger particles. This is what's so interesting. Here you have photons moving at different angles. And they're changing, they're causing that which is dead to come alive. And they're changing all of these things. And these are all photons. And you'll see that when you get the article. That's the experiment. But the important thing to understand, and I can't emphasize it too much, is that science calls photons messengers. They're called messengers. That's really interesting. So what we have here in photons are angles of light that act as messengers. Angels of light that act as messengers. Now go back to page 77. Now we just gave you. Look down the next paragraph. Angel, according to many religions, spiritual being created by God. The word angel comes from a Greek word meaning messenger. The angel is a messenger. The photon on an angle is a messenger. Could there be anything connected? Obviously. I mean, that's where I'm coming from. Yeah, that's what it is. So now we look up this word, angel. One who is sent, the messenger. Thus, an angle of light is a photon, is a messenger. Okay? Because we know that scientifically. We have that written in our science book. An angle of light is a photon, is a messenger. An angel of light is a messenger. The same. No problem there. Now, from the Greek word angel means messenger. If you have your stuff with you and you go to 14I, okay, 14I in this material that I gave you, and if you look at 14I, you see the word angel. All right? So this is what's interesting. You see here, for those of you who don't have, okay, the word angel at the top comes from the Latin angelus. Angel, from the Latin angelus. Okay, fine. No problem with that. The word angle, if you go down one into the middle, from the Middle English, angel. And the word angle, from the Latin angelus. Are the ancients who wrote this calling them angels because they knew they were angles of light who brought messages to you? Of course. Or it's an awful coincidence, so I don't think. So then is the messenger, which is an angle of light in science, called an angel of light in religion because it actually is an angle of light? In Austria, the entire experiment was centered around angles of light. B, C, entangled, then coming with A. Now look back to the stuff you just got on page 77. I just gave it to you. On page 77, look back to there. You look under angels, and you see where it says that angels traditionally are servants of God. You see that? And messengers between God and human beings. Well, you just saw the angle of light on the screen up here, coming through, white light, and then coming through into the color spectrum. And if it came from above, we'll say it came from God to human beings, to you and me. Now that fits, doesn't it? Absolutely. Now, let me share something very interesting with you. Very unique and, again, indicative of the involvement of the visitors of light. And what I'm telling you is that all this was set up for you by an intelligence from another plane who put this all together for you to find. And I'm trying to help you to find it, to see it. But let me show you how this works. So, when we look at names, you know, they played games with us. For instance, we said, who is the most famous, what is the name of the most famous person in gambling on the East Coast? Trump. Well, of course, that's a gambling term. And what is the name of the most famous gambling person in Las Vegas? Win. Okay. Now, all of computers are built around logic circuits, which are called gates. Who is the most famous man in the computer industry? What's his name? Okay. All right. Now, remember I told you that Om is the chant. Remember when people go into meditation up in the mountains and Himalayas and all that stuff, and they get into meditation and you hear them going, Om, Om. Basically what they were doing was restricting or changing the flow of current that was going up the spine to the brain, so that the brain, the mind, could function the way it was supposed to without an overabundance of electricity. You know, of course, that all of your appliances at home have to have resistors, or else if too much current will blow the thing out, which is what happens to a lot of us in our head. So they chant Om in meditation. Okay? Now, what was interesting is that the international measurement of electrical resistance was found to be Ohm. But they were chanting Ohm long before the 1700s, when the measurement of electrical resistance was discovered by George Simon Ohm of Germany. That's who found it. Now, if his name was George Simon Schultz, what would they have been chanting up in the mountains? Schultz. Because it was all set. Okay? All right. So now you have spent here 40 minutes or so with me, and we've been looking at angles of light as angels of light and photons in the Austrian experiment. Now, electromagnetic radiation that we can see runs from 4,000 in violet to 7,700 in red. And the way they do that is measuring the wavelength, measuring the angle of the wavelength in order to determine, what light spectrum you're in. The discovery was made by a Swedish scientist. Okay? And remember, what he is going to discover is that by measuring the angles, you can measure the wavelengths and come up with electromagnetic radiation spectrums and so forth. His name is Anders Jonas Angstrom. If you look on page 77 of your material I just gave you, it says angstrom, a unit of length equal to centimeters special wavelength, also called angstrom unit after Anders Jonas Angstrom. So Mr. Ohm discovered Ohm, and Mr. Angstrom discovered angels. Now, I mean, yeah, you might start to get the clues that somebody's pulling your chain, and they are, waiting for you to say, hey, what's going on here? You know, what's going on here? So, the movement of photon at death that we were talking about, and as we receive messages and send messages, are via angles or angels, and you measure this force of angels in a word called angstroms. So the messenger is photon. Photon is an angle of light. And look what the Bible says. Go to page 67 in the Bible that you have, if you have it in your hand, in Exodus chapter 23. I mean, you know, come on. If nothing else, this is neat stuff. It's interesting stuff. I mean, to me, it's just fascinating. When I started studying the angles, and I would say, well, you know, where does word angstroms come from? That's pretty weird. And then you look up in the guy that was Mr. Angstrom. And I got Mr. Ohm and Mr. Wynne and Mr. Gates. And all, you know, too good. It's too good to be a coincidence. And it's very important for you to know, because what you can know, as you understand it, is there is an intelligence standing right behind you, ready to move in here and show you the way, and show me the way. But they require you to leave religion far behind you. It knows nothing of this stuff. And remember again, unless you move A to C, you can never see God. You can never be one with God. And you cannot move that by talking or praying or singing or going to church. You can only move that by doing your meditation and changing your polarization. And it will change for you. It's not something that you have to say, how am I going to do? Change my angle? I'll meditate like this. Well, that's silly. You don't have to do anything. What do you have to do when you eat food? Do you have to digest it? Of course not. Do you have to say, I think I'll grow some more hair, which would be a good idea for me, but I mean, you know, you can't. Your heart beats, you breathe. You want to screw yourself up, try to adjust your own breath. Everything is done automatically for you. And when you go into meditation, this change of polarization is done automatically for you. That's what's so neat about this. Okay. But look what it says in Exodus 23. And stay there if you would. Exodus 23, verse 20. It says there, behold, I send an angel before you to keep you in the way and to bring you into the place which I have prepared. But now we know what it is. We know it's an angle of light. It's a photon. To bring you to the place which is prepared. Not just after you're dead, but while you're alive, if you'll take this seriously. And you'll do it. And yet all of the religions have screamed at me and screamed at us for all of these things that we teach. An expression of this light. And if you right where you are in Exodus 23, if you go down to the next verse, down to 21, look what it says here. Beware of him. This is this angle of light. And obey his voice. Provoke him not. For he will not pardon your transgressions, for my name is in him. But if you shall obey his voice and do all that I speak, then I will be an enemy to your enemies and an adversary to your adversaries. And you've wondered all of your life, how come it doesn't work? Because you've never tried it. You have never tried it. You've done everything that the religion said to do, and they hadn't a clue as to what to do. And so now you're finding that this is what has to be done. B comes to A and makes us one with C. The polarization, which is the obstruction to us in life and death, is most graphically demonstrated in a story in the Bible that's kind of silly, and they make it silly so that you don't believe it, but you know, they out there in these churches, they do believe it. And there's a guy named Balaam who's riding on an ass, which is a donkey. You know. And he hits the donkey, and the donkey turns around and says, "What'd you do that for?" That's silly. But you see, when this polarization is set up to the point, and I'll be done here in a minute, this polarization, when the angle is as it is, if you're not meditating, you're all over the place, you know, you cannot get to see. There's an obstruction, there's a filter here. There's another filter here. We saw that in the filters when we looked at the other overhead. Now, how are you going to get through here? See, you're coming through like this, and your wave, and the God side is going through like this. So how is that? You've got to get like that. How are you going to do that? There's an obstruction here. What you've always heard this to be, in your religious terms, is Satan. You'll also get to understand it as somebody called Samael. All right? And let me show you Samael at his best, doing some talking, although they don't call him Samael. You'll have to take my word for it. That's who this is. Let's just look at this, and then we'll go. I believe it. I ripped this out. You have to put it out to get a note. Okay, let's go. Let's just look at this. The story here is that Balaam is on top of this donkey, and they're riding along. And the donkey sees the angle of light, which is very consistent with the animal's ability to see things and hear things that we can't. And the donkey freaks. You know, what is this? And so he falls down. You know, the donkey's freaking out. And this guy's hitting the donkey, and the donkey's saying, "What the heck you do that for?" Anyhow, go to page 139, Numbers chapter 22. And then we'll get out of here. I'm very happy that I was able to do this because I've been coughing up a storm, and I was scared to death, and so everything worked good. Oh, what I do want to give you 78 and 79 to take with you. You know what? Maybe we won't do the donkey until next week. Won't we? You want to do the donkey? We'll do the donkey. Did you hear that? Oh, do the donkey. God. Okay, if you look then at Numbers, you got it there? And here if you say, look at verse 27. And when the ass saw the angel of the Lord, and remember this is an angle, she fell down under Balaam, and Balaam's anger was kindled, and he hit the ass with a stick. And the Lord opened the mouth of the ass, and the donkey turned around and said, "What do I do to you? What'd you hit me for?" And Balaam said unto the donkey, "Because you have mocked me." Well, I mean, here's a guy that's talking back to a donkey anyhow, you know what I mean? If there was a sword here, I'd kill you. Okay, so anyhow, let's get out of here. Verse 32, the angel comes. This is Samael. The angle of light speaks. And look what Samael says in verse 32. Now remember, what this really is, this is the filter that doesn't allow this polarization to get through. All right? And Samael says in verse 32, the angel of the Lord said, "What'd you hit the donkey for?" 3 times. "Behold, I went out to withstand you because your way is perverse before me." And the donkey saw me and turned from me 3 times. And unless she turned from me, I would have killed you, and I would have saved her. And Balaam said unto the angel, "I've sinned, for I did not know that you stood in the way against me. Now therefore, to displease you, I'll get me back again." So right here we have a picture of an angle or an angel who stands in the way, an angle who blocks the way. And if you look at page 77 in this material, you look at polarizing filter, you'll see that it allows only waves vibrating in a certain direction to pass through. You see that? A transparent glass that allows only waves vibrating in a certain direction to pass through. It's very important as we connect the story of the angel who blocks the pathway with that of Samael who blocks the path and requires one to know the symbol Azozio in 4555. For those of you who don't know about the 4555, come up here after it's over, take a look at this. 4555 is a galaxy in the constellation Coma, which is mother and child. And we had the fortune of being able to get a picture of it off the internet, and that's a picture of 4555, and it's kind of special to us, and that's why we have it up here. Okay, so it would be crystal polarization that would either allow you to flow through or have your path blocked, and that depends on your meditation. And I'm not simply talking about at the time of death. Now, I want to provide you with more stuff. Okay, so we'll do this, and then you can get right out of here. There is page 78 and 79, which you'll make as part of your thing. Now do this fast, because they're really going to get up in arms here. They've been sitting here a long time. They want to get out of here and go on Route 9. For what? I don't know.
Because it's 9, it's higher consciousness.
Yeah. Okay. Real fast. Everybody. Okay. Now, you and I will go over these things in the coming weeks, but I wanted you to have it, and if you start being good, maybe you'll bring these things once in a while. But if you don't, you don't. That's okay, too. But if you look on the page 78 of the material, I have highlighted reflection, which is angle, and polarization. Okay? And if you look under nature of light, I have highlighted photons, which are interaction of light and matter. And I have highlighted reflection and refraction, the angle on a substance with a higher index. I've underlined polarization of light, random angles unpolarized, the same angles polarized. And I've underlined interference and diffraction. When light beams may cross, they may interfere with one another. You can see that, okay? What the heck kind of noisy place is this? All right, what's he doing? You got that? Okay. These are the angles of light. In other words, I just want you to have that, so if anybody says, where the heck does he get that from, you got the documentation. That forms the basis of what we're talking about. Okay? No problem. Now I've given you 79. And I want you to meet somebody who I've always looked at as a mentor for many years. He's the father of modern philosophy. His name is Rene Descartes, and he's from France. And I have highlighted under Rene Descartes that he's the father of modern philosophy. I have highlighted that he experimented in the science of optics. Now, Rene Descartes said this. Rene Descartes said that where man and God meet in the human body is at the pineal gland of the brain. Okay? Now, you would say, well, who the heck is he to say that? You know, another boob making a statement about the pineal gland of the brain. But this is the kind of guy like this. These are my ministers. These are the kind of ministers I like to follow. Okay? He experimented in the science of optics. He attempted to apply ration science and mathematics to philosophy. He held nothing true until he established grounds for believing in it. He argued the existence of God. And I have highlighted that in optics, he discovered the fundamental law of reflection, the angle of incidence equal to the angle of reflection. And he paved the way for the universal theory of light. And you have documentation of that. I think he's a pretty credible witness when he says the place where God and you meet is in the pineal gland of the brain. He's not a missionary. He's not a minister. He's a scientist, and just look at that. He discovered the fundamental law of reflection and the angle of incidence. He paved the way for the theory of light. Okay? All right. I don't want to keep it on. We'll look at the rest of that as we go along. But Rene Descartes is very, very important because you see what I'm saying to you. If somebody says, oh, well, it's the pineal gland of the brain, and then somebody say, well, you know, where is he? You know, as you can see, this guy is eminently qualified to talk about light and reflection of light in the human body and so forth and so on. And so he is something that I think we want to pay a lot of attention to. We covered a lot of stuff, and, you know, it just goes on. But I can't be more clear to you when we study these particular things. Try to say, is there a logic for what we've shared together? And if there is a logic, then think about it. And is it possible then by you meditating that your polarization will change, which will open you to universal light? And if that is the case, then it's it's just tremendously, you know, the implications for your life are tremendous. And remember that Joan has the article from the Associated Press about these experiment in Austria that start, and you're more than welcome to have one. You have them, huh? If you don't have one, would you just raise your hand? Anybody else? Do you have one? You have one? Bob and Margaret don't have one. Okay. So, I mean, there it is. And it's not written in the New Age Journal or the, you know, Crystals and Feathers. This is written in the Associated Press and something that happened in Austria. Okay, well, thank you very much for sharing this time with us.
Please visit our new website at www.hiddenmeanings.com. That's www.hiddenmeanings.com. Thank you.